Hey guys, it's Steve from Featherlight, and today we're checking out the Mackie ProFX version 3, and this is the smallest of the line. They make a whole bunch of them, but we're going to check out the little 6-channel guy, and it's great for podcasts and for mixing sources, for example, into a mirrorless camera or really smaller applications like that, but it's still got a built-in audio interface. So it's got Onyx Mic Preamps, and it's got effects right on board. So we want to find out what it sounds like, how good those Onyx Mic Preamps actually sound, and whether we can use it all in a production environment. Let's check it out. The Mackie is incredibly small and compact. It's about the size of 2 cell phones put together, and that makes it incredibly portable and convenient. It's definitely small enough to throw into a very small backpack or possibly even a large purse, but there are some compromises made to keep that thing the size that it is. On the back, we have our power switch, which is a welcome addition. It has a locking DC power connector and our USB port. The unit can't be bus powered as it provides true 48-volt phantom power, which is more than most USB buses can provide. The ProFX6 can accept 6 total inputs, the first 2 of which are the channel strips, and these combination jacks can accept both XLR connectors and line level connectors, balanced and unbalanced. The channel strip is controlled by the level knob down here on the bottom. Channel 2 works exactly the same way with its level control here. Channels 3 and 4 are stereo or mono inputs, and those are controlled by the center knob here, channel 3 and 4. That's a stereo control. It's a bit oddly placed. And then 5 and 6 is our final connection. That's a stereo input on an 1/8-inch mini jack. Right next to that is our blend knob, which balances the first 2 tracks coming back from our computer against the 0 latency input of the mixer itself. Right next to that is our headphones output, and this comes on a standard stereo 1/4-inch plug. And these are loud and powerful, more than enough to drive both low and high ohm headphone sets. Above that is our master effects to main knob. We'll talk more about that later. And finally, our master volume control. That shows up on our XLR jacks. It's mirrored on our 1/4-inch jacks as well as the headphone out, which means they're all tied together, and the master level control works as a post control for all of them. The dual input connectors on the mixer allow you a ton of flexibility. You can use regular line level sources that are balanced or unbalanced, which is tip, ring, and sleeve, or just tip and sleeve, like for example a guitar cable if you're going to plug in a guitar or a passive bass. In addition, they can also accept a standard microphone cable, which is XLR, and once plugged in, those take advantage of the really high quality Mackie Onyx preamps and all 60 dB of gain they impart. If the microphone you're using requires phantom power, or the device like a direct box does, the Mackie has its own phantom power switch, and it provides phantom power to both channels 1 and 2 simultaneously. The first thing we do after plugging our microphone in is turn its channel volume down and set the gain knob. This is done by the gain knob and the level set LED. As we check the mic and we bring our gain level up, we start to see the level set LED light up, and that gives us confirmation that we have the best possible signal going into the mixer without distortion. With the mic gain set correctly, we can now bring the individual channel level up to wherever we need it. Check 1, 2, check test 1, 2, check, check, check 1, 2. One of the biggest selling points of the Mackie is its powerful and crystal clear Onyx preamps. This is strong enough to drive an SM7B without any difficulty whatsoever. It provides 60 dB of clear, clean, and powerful gain. Check, check, check 1, 2, check, check, check 1, 2. The SM7B by Shure is notoriously low on output, and this mixer has no difficulty whatsoever in driving that input. The next 2 buttons that we see on our input after our mic has been plugged in is we have a high Z input. So for example, if we want to use a regular instrument cable that is simply tip and sleeve, like a passive bass or, for example, a passive electric guitar, we can plug it directly in, engage that high Z input. This isn't a volume thing, it's an impedance thing. So what that means is if you plug your guitar directly into that combi jack and that's not engaged, it isn't going to be too quiet or too loud. It's not going to be the right impedance, which means it's going to affect your tone. So you're going to have way too much high end, for example. So by engaging that, it turns this into a DI box or direct injection box, and it's simply another piece of gear you don't have to buy if you want to track your guitars and basses directly into this channel. Right below that switch is our low-cut filter switch, and this is great for reducing mic handling noise and rumble in the background. It just rolls off everything below about 100 Hertz down. Right below the low cut switch is our gain knob. We used this earlier when we were setting up our microphone levels. The line diagram closest to the inside of the knob shows us the gain achievable when we're using a microphone. On the outside is the one for using line level sources, unbalanced or balanced, or even instrument cables. That one gives us 20 dB of cut. The U on the top stands for unity, which is it's not making it louder and it's not making it quieter. And it goes all the way up to 40 dB boost if we need it. Right underneath the gain knob is our equalization section. We've got two different sections here, and these are shelving filters. The top one gives us the ability to add or subtract 15 dB of gain. At 12K, this is great for taming a harsh vocal or adding a bit of air to a really dull one. On the bottom, we get that same plus or minus 15 dB of cut or boost, but it's at 80 Hertz. This is great for rolling off things that are really rumbly or adding a bit of body to things that aren't. Directly under that is our FX send button, as well as our stereo pan button. We're going to talk more about those later. And then at the very bottom is our channel level knob. It sends the result of all of our changes over to our mains volume knob. Right next to our mic input channels 1 and 2 are our line level inputs for channels 3 and 4. These can be mono or stereo. This is great for mixing in keys or other musical line level sources. However, it's important to note that this channel has no trim or gain control, only final channel volume, which means all your gain settings have to be controlled from the audio source. The same is true for channels 5 and 6. This is our stereo 1/8" mini plug input. There are no trim or gain controls, only final level controls. So this is great for phones or MP3 players or other sources that use this connector. Just keep in mind that you'll have to make your initial gain settings on the device or phone itself. The USB channels 3 and 4 return button, if pressed, will mute the input of channels 5 and 6 and instead play back the audio coming back from your computer if it's assigned to channels 3 and 4. We'll get more into that in a little bit. Another great feature that's kind of hard to find on mixers in this price range or size is the ability to mute all the channels. So simply by hitting this button, this will mute all the incoming channels to the mixer. So you can mute yourself in a Zoom or Skype meeting, or if you're a small duo or group and you're using this for live performance, you can simply hit the button and mute all the mixer inputs at one time. Next up is the effects section of the ProFX board. And on the smallest of these boards, it's the only one that doesn't actually have an individual knob to send to the effects unit itself. Instead, we have these switches. So this is really the one area of the board that really falls down in terms of flexibility, and that's due entirely to its size. You got to make some compromises to get this kind of power and flexibility in a box this size. You can turn on or turn off the effect for each one of the channels, and those can be independent, but only the first 2 channels can use the effects device, and you don't have a control, for example, like you do here on the EQ, you don't have a control to send a specific amount from channel 1 and then have a different amount being sent from channel 2. It's either 100% on or it's 100% off. So we've depressed effects 1, and now as I raise this, you're going to start to hear effects in the background. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. And then that is going to be mixed with our signal, our live dry signal, and it's going to go out the main outputs left and right. And because those effects are going out our main outputs, that means they're also going to get recorded. Now, that may not be a problem if you're recording a live performance, for example. But if you're multi-tracking, we're going to need to turn those off if we want to have control later in our DAW. The ProFX6 version 3 has the Gig Effects engine built right into it, and these are high-quality effects. It gives us 24 presets in all, and they range from delays, choruses, reverbs, and even some overdrive. These are really good quality and absolutely usable in a live performance environment. We'll do a quick overview of the effects section here, but we'll cover each one of the individual effects in the next video. It's important to understand that none of the onboard presets or effects are programmable in any way, shape, or form other than the amount that the master effect to main knob sends to the effect engine from the two channels. Also important to note that the FX to main knob itself is the only control that controls the amount that goes to the effects engine, and it is incredibly sensitive. So it ends up being fairly challenging to get a subtle reverb or a subtle delay without the effect dying out completely or dying into one side of the mains or headphones output. If we start with the effects mains knob all the way down, and if we bring it back up just slightly, check 1, 2, it starts to come into both ears, and we're nowhere near unity gain. So at unity, that would be full blast. Check 1, 2, check, check, check 1, 2. So the takeaway here is that the effects to mains knob is simply way too sensitive. The potentiometer itself simply has most of its throw in the very first couple of positions of the knob. And the rest of this, check 1, 2, check, check, check 1, 2, as you can hear, is almost useless. There's very, very few scenarios where you would ever use it anywhere near that high. This is probably because there's one effect in the 24 presets called overdrive, which under normal circumstances would be used in place of the dry signal. But because we can't have individual control over the send amounts, meaning there's no way to send all of the channel signal to the effects section without turning the channel volume up like we can on a larger mixer. We have to turn up the FX to main knob completely to hear the overdrive signal loud enough. And with the effects to main knob turned all the way up, it still isn't replacing the guitar tone the way a VST would. It's actually just adding the sound of distortion to the incoming clean guitar signal. So it's not an ideal solution. It's passable, but not spectacular, and you're more than likely going to be doing all your guitar emulation inside the DAW anyway. So it's a shame that the rest of these very good presets have to suffer their mix flexibility as the result of just a few. The Mackie has some additional tricks up its sleeve when connecting to computers because it's a 2x4 USB interface as opposed to the standard 2x2. In this configuration, we're going to set the mixer up to record multi-track audio into our computer's DAW. The Mackie can record up to 2 tracks simultaneously. For this setup, we're going to be using the phones out instead of the mains out to a pair of studio monitors, as we'll be using live microphones. Without a true AUX bus, it might be more challenging for you to record yourself plus an additional performer, as you all have to share the same mix and the same headphone output. But engaging the 2 phones switch helps this by taking the computer playback completely out of the mains and putting it into the headphone jack only. We also need to go into our computer's audio sound card settings and make sure that they're set to their default 1 and 2 outputs. We're also going to be using the stereo pan switch that we referred to earlier in conjunction with our 2 phone switch. Using this will force channel 1 signal completely to the left of the main outputs and channel 2 signal completely to the right. This is necessary as it keeps one channel from bleeding into the other channel when we record mono inputs into our DAW. And finally, for our multi-track recording setup, it's important to understand that the master control volume on the mixer does not control what gets recorded into the DAW. Instead, it's the individual channel levels themselves. When we depress the 2 phones button, we hear the incoming mixer audio now being blended with the computer playback audio. You'll also notice that the mains level control is turned down as the 2 phone switch overrides it. If we hit playback on the DAW, we can blend the balance of the input channels on the mixer, which is all the way to the left, and those are latency free, so we hear them in real time, or we can have more of just the DAW playback if we go all the way to the right. And then somewhere in the middle there is our perfect playback balance. This allows us to come up and arm the channel, and then from here, start the record process. Now, as we look at the meter, we can see that we're recording just what's coming in channel 1. And because it's panned all the way to the left, we're not picking up any of channel 2 or anything else on the board. Now we can go back into the DAW and audition the channel that we've just recorded. We'll go ahead and disarm it. And when we hit playback, and as we raise the channel volume, we start to hear the previous recording. It's coming in channel 1. And because it's panned all the way to the left, we're not picking up any of channel 2 or anything else on the board. As we continue to add additional audio tracks, we still have complete control over the balance of the playback level from the computer versus the signals that are coming into the mixer. And if we disengage the 2 phones button, it simply mutes the playback from the computer altogether. In this configuration, we're going to go into our computer's audio sound card settings and change the outputs from 1 and 2 to channels 3 and 4 instead. Now, when we depress the USB 3.4 switch, we have complete control over the computer playback level on channels 5 and 6. This is a much more controllable version of the loopback feature that you're starting to see more and more of on smaller 2x2 interfaces like those from the Focusrite Scarlett series. Here, we're playing back a YouTube video with complete control over the level while simultaneously recording a vocal on top of it. This feature is great for things like making tutorials. If we disengage the USB 3.4 button, it just mutes the computer playback completely. This makes this incredibly portable mixer a real streaming and podcasting powerhouse, as all of the inputs, including the computer playback, can have their own levels adjusted independently, and you could record the entire result out the Mackie's XLR outputs or the duplicate 1/4 inch outputs. In this configuration, we're going to set the mixer up to do a live streaming and podcasting session. So the first thing we'll need to do is to go back into our computer sound card settings and change the default audio outputs back to 1 and 2. And this involves what's known as a mix minus system. And what this means is during a Skype or Zoom call, or any call generated from the computer, when it goes into the mixer and then round trip back into the computer, it creates an echo that the caller hears on their end. And we want to eliminate that by the use of this mix minus system. So we want them to hear what we're doing minus their own voice. That's kind of where the expression mix minus comes from. So for this particular session, we're going to have our input channels set up to where we need them to be for our talent here. We also have real-time phone calls coming from our iPhone, and those are going to go into channels 5 and 6. That's our stereo 1/8 inch mini plug. We also want to make sure that we disengage the USB 3.4 computer playback button, as we want complete control over the phone call that's going to come in channels 5 and 6. So when we initiate, for example, a FaceTime call, we can change the volume right here on 5 and 6. Hey, brother, no worries, man. Hey, I'm actually doing a test call. I'm doing a video on my little mixer, and I wanted to test out FaceTime, so I thought I'd bug you at 8 o'clock in the morning.
I've been practicing for an hour and a half. I'm good.
Oh, sweet. You're an early riser for sure. The other thing we want to make sure we do is set up the 2 phones switch. We want to make sure that is engaged. And that's important. That's the most important thing, because that keeps our incoming audio from the computer from going back out the mains itself. And that means it'll get recorded and they'll hear that echo. So with our headphones plugged into the mixer and the 2 phone switch engaged, we have control over the balance of the computer audio, which will be our Skype and Zoom calls, and our own voices coming into the mixer itself. It's important to note that our master level knob control does not control what our Skype and Zoom callers will hear, but rather the individual channel's volume controls instead. And if we want to, we can even depress one of the effects switches here and add real-time effects during the call. Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. And the final configuration we're going to look at is recording the Mackie's main outputs into a computer or even a larger mixer. And for this setup, things couldn't be easier, as the Mackie's default hardware configuration is already designed to record whatever comes out the main outputs straight into the computer. This works great as a standalone mixer, or even using the Mackie as a submixer into a larger system. You simply set up all your inputs into the mixer, create the mix that you like, and hit record on your favorite computer app. Or using the Mackie Live, take the duplicate set of the main outputs and plug it into a larger system altogether. All right, so to answer the question, are the onboard preamps for this little guy good enough to use in a production environment? And the answer is absolutely yes. The Mackie Onyx preamps are as good as any of the preamps that we use here in the studio. In fact, some of our mixing boards actually use Onyx preamps. They're incredibly quiet, clean, and they got 60 dB of gain. So if you're using really low output microphones like Ribbons or an SM7B, and you're using it in a podcast or maybe a streaming situation, this might just save you. So who is this really aimed for? Well, clearly because of its size and portability, and the fact that it has professional grade preamps, you're really looking at live performance, definitely. So singer-songwriters, smaller groups, the people who are going to really be able to take advantage of this quality. It's got great onboard effects, albeit some limitations, but more than enough to get the job done, and they cover most of your basic categories. Also for things like streamers and podcasters who want pro quality audio but want an incredibly small and portable solution, This is definitely in that same category as well. So highly recommended. I would say that the quality of this as a whole package is really spot on. Built like a tank, really rugged construction, and yet incredibly portable. Obviously, small enough to put inside a backpack. Hey, if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. Stay safe out there and be creative. Thanks for hanging out today. We'll catch you in the next video.